is the same material that Rob Devitt used at the OHA. And I don't intend to talk to it all. You know, you've got a copy of it, you can distribute it, it's all public knowledge, shared as much as you want. But I'm going to skip through it and I'm going to get to some of the high points. And I often think the high points are different things than the other people who do these presentations, so you get a little bit of my opinion. So I do want to update that. I want to talk about the e-health record. Rob likes animation, Rob Devitt, so there's lots of animation. I'm going to try and avoid that. But if you want to save time reading this book, just go to this chart. Because it talks about the three focus, or foci, whatever it is that we've got: diabetes, medication management, and wait times. You can pick anything you want. I happen to like these three, and it's not just because I went to Cabinet and sold them on this kind of focus. But those are only the clinical priorities. Diabetes, the reason I like that is because it touches so many people. That's very unfortunate news for the province of Ontario, but there's not a primary care provider of any type out there who doesn't deal with people with diabetes. Medication management, you know, I'm fairly simple-minded, so you convince me quickly. You know, we've got how many people in hospital in Kingston today because of drug interactions and inappropriate medications? And some researcher, I forget where they were from, actually provided evidence to me that drug interactions was the 7th leading cause of death in North America. And I was appalled. And he had the evidence to prove to me that that was true. Some researcher will come up with other evidence, but it doesn't matter if it's 7th or 10th or 9th. That's pretty appalling. And with e-health, we can do something about that. Wait times has been around for a while. It's actually been fairly successful. I think it's got a long way to go. And I was involved on the Access to Cure Steering Committee. I think Paul was probably on that with me as well. We run into each other a lot. This is one of those things where you just have to keep pushing away at it. It's making some small progress, and we have to keep going. But that's not the e-health strategy at the top. Those are the clinical priorities, and we need all these boxes underneath, these wonderfully color-coded boxes. And I just want to talk about them quickly, and I'll spend most of the time I talk with these up there. Cornerstone information systems, you know, labs, drugs, physician e-health. Are there any physicians in the room? Okay, I'll have to be a little more careful. Not at all. And I've had the physician e-health file inside government and out for as long as there's been a physician e-health file. I'm actually on the board of Ontario MD as well, and I'm really pleased, by the way, to see that there's a couple of Ontario MD regional reps here. Because physicians are key to the health system. Everyone knows that. They're not the only key, but they are one. And we want them to adopt e-health and share information. And there's been lots of focus. I spent lots of time in the ministry around the primary care file, suggesting that primary care physicians don't really share a lot of information with other primary care physicians. They do occasionally, but if we can get the information sharing with specialists and with community care and long-term care, I think we'll actually build the value proposition for physicians. And we have a partnership model with Ontario MD and the OMA that I think is really going to help us do that. We've just put a new deal in place that's much better than the old one. Old one was primary care only. This one's primary care and specialists. Old one did nothing for people who were early adopters. This one actually has some continuation for the people who adopted early and made their own decisions. This deal actually includes people like nurse practitioners and other people who are involved in primary care who happen to be in a family health team, because that was kind of unusual before. We'd fund a family health team except for nurse practitioners. So we can actually do that. And my partner is a nurse practitioner, so it's got nothing to do with that reason, but she looks on that. She worked at a CAP in Toronto. But we've got all these kinds of things. Telemedicine, huge success story. Ed Brown, who heads up telemedicine, good friend of mine, and I will say, I don't work for the Ministry of Health anymore. I would have said this even if I did. One of the reasons telehealth, telemedicine, is such a success in Ontario, where it probably is a world-leading system, with probably the exception of the American military, is because the Ministry of Health didn't have very much to do with it. They were kind of out of the way, and OTN and the other two networks did great things, and they did exactly what the people and the providers wanted them to do. And the Ministry of Health wasn't allowed to mess it up too much, and there was some good guidance from the ministry. I shouldn't be totally facetious, but we've got these cornerstone information systems. They tend to be silo-based. Well, e-health is about integrating those silos, as the previous speaker said. Clinical activity, there's all kinds of it going on. DI is a big thing in this, Lynn, I know. And really a lot of these are about limited resources. We don't have a radiologist sitting in every little community or at every small place all the time, and we're doing some really good things locally and tying them together provincially to try and make best use of those resources. And believe me, again, the northern void here, that's something that's really important as you get farther and farther away from the large cities. Technology services don't like to talk about too much, but I'm sure there's some techies in the room. If you don't have it, good luck. And that's network and hosting and user IDs and passwords and all those great things that we all want to work perfectly. And one of the things the politicians like to do here is talk about the banking system and how it just happened overnight and it's always perfect. I don't know where they were. We're getting close to Christmas. I can remember about 10 years ago, I really like Interact, standing at a store in the Cataraqui Town Center, and there's a line about 40 minutes long of people wanting to use their Interact because the transactions are taking like 10 minutes to go around. Well, the politicians obviously weren't there because they think the banking system happened overnight and they think it's perfect. And it actually is pretty good, I have to admit, quite good when it didn't happen overnight, and they invest a lot in the technology. And they really changed their business processes as well. Enabling practices and talent management, I don't want to say too much about it. But you do need standards. Like, one of the reasons that integration is very important, because you can't get everybody to change and use the same system, well then you need standards. And just to let you know, our strategy is completely architecture-based, so you can take the architecture document, it's this thick. Some people think it's way more interesting than a little glossy strategy document. I'm not one of them, although I do understand it. But it's also messaging-based and standards-based. Because if we're going to send e-referral messages, for example, something that I think there's huge value on, we can't do it all. The Ministry of Health can't do it all. But if someone can say, here's the message that we want you to do for a cardiac referral, we want you to have these fields of information stored this way, here's the message set, well then people can just go ahead and do that. And there's going to be a lot more of that in the future as we move forward as well. I hope there's more animation. I'm not going to say too much. Can't do it in Queen's Park in Toronto. It needs clinicians, it needs all the other stakeholders, the organizations out there. It actually needs the people to really get involved as well. And anyone, I will say, I don't want to be too, are there any politicians in the room? Maybe I'll ask that. Someone who thinks that Google Health is the answer to all this, if Google Health was, it would be a success in the United States. Google Health, and I'm a real fan of, by the way, portals and Google, and it's my homepage and the whole deal. I just love that. But it's not flying in the United States because it only has health information in it that you put in. Well, if all you're putting in there is stuff you already know, I am getting older and I forget a little bit, but if it doesn't have the integration with the actual clinical systems from providers, it's not really going to go. And that, I talk a lot to groups like Google and Microsoft, that's what they're really after, is a clinical link to that so that not only is the information in there that people put in about themselves, but it's got some of the core information from some of the clinical systems. So that's an integration and a standards and a message sharing play. Vendors are at the bottom. I don't think it says anything on here about open and honest procurement, but there has to be open and honest procurement. And if anybody here is trying to do anything in the system, you know what those procurement rules are doing. The fastest sprinter in the world isn't going to break 10 seconds if they're running through gel. And it feels like that sometimes, but at eHealth Ontario, we will sacrifice our deadlines and everything you see in the strategy for open and honest procurement every time, and we're already doing that. And I'm sure you're all doing it.